Faiz was not simply known as Faiz, but he was often known as Hamara Faiz. In other words, he was ours, and everybody claimed Faiz to be their own. When he died, a lot of Muslims thought that Faiz belonged to them. There were people of the atheistic community who, when Faiz had a traditional funeral sessions, according to the Muslim rites, atheist friends of his said, no, Faiz would have not wanted to been part of this Muslim tradition. He was ours. Faiz has a great following in India, especially in the JNU, where Faiz's poem Hum Dekhenge was recited with a lot of political protest. Simply, even in Pakistan, Faiz is regarded as one of, if not the greatest poets of all time. So Faiz's appeal in a lot of ways is universal. And when he died, around 10,000 people came at his funeral procession. And this, remember, was at a time when Zia-ul-Haq had military dictatorship over the land. So if there are people who suggest that if Zia's rule wasn't there, about 100,000 people would have turned up in Faiz's funeral processions. That's the appeal of the man. His poems have a great deal of range. You could take a look at Faiz's poems with a touch of Buddhism as well. This is the figure of Gautama Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. Shows him quite etiolated, quite emaciated. There was a period in Gautama Buddha's time, after he left the kingdom in order to pursue the path of Buddhahood, where he didn't even eat food for a long period of time. It has been said that for about 6 years or so, he only ate 1 grain of rice per day. And towards the latter half of these 6 years, perhaps he didn't even eat a single grain. As a result, he was quite etiolated. And he had doubts about it. He thought maybe this might not be the proper way to meditate. I mean, all of this austerity, all of this giving up on eating and drinking and all of these things might not be all that great. There was a lady who came up to him, offered him food. He ate it, and it was after a long period of time that his stomach was full. 5 of the other monks who were meditating with Gautama Buddha around the time, in the hopes of attaining Buddhahood in their own ways, frowned upon Buddha for eating the food and said, no, you're not a part of us anymore. You're an outcast. Or, I mean, we're 6 of us are outcasts already, but you're the more outcasted of the outcasts. So Buddha was on his own, left to his own devices after that. And one of the things that dawned on him was that the life of extremities isn't that good. I mean, he had tasted the most wonderful pleasures in life as a king. All of the most delectable foods were served up to him, perhaps the most ravishing of drinks as well. He had experienced a high on that regard. And on the contrary, he also had experienced a lot of lows. I mean, this statue on its own gives you a sense of the lows he experienced. And after that encounter with that woman who presented him food after 6 years, he thought we should get rid of these 2 extremes. Extremes aren't great. Doesn't really mean that you've got to sit perfectly in between 2 options you have, but it's the philosophy that came after this event is often known as the middle way, Madhyam Marga as it's called, where a lot of students of Buddhism say that it's not about being perfectly in between of the 2 options, but it's about going above and beyond the extremes in a lot of ways. This is often depicted as a symbol of the middle way. And Faiz, in some ways, in his poems, reflects the idea of middle way as well. Some people are quite torn between the work that they do and the love they pursue. Sometimes you're not quite loving your job as much. Sometimes most of the times, it's quite difficult to balance the art of love and the art of work, as it were. And Faiz has a beautiful poem about this contradiction. He says, and I forgot the title of the poem, but in one of his many great poems, he says, वो लोग बहुत खुशकिस्मत थे जो इश्क को काम समझते थे या काम से आशिकी करते थे। हम तो जीते जी मसरूफ़ रहे, थोड़ा इश्क किया थोड़ा काम किया। काम इश्क के आड़े आता रहा और इश्क से काम उलझता रहा। काम इश्क के आड़े आता रहा और इश्क से काम उलझता रहा, और फिर आखिर तंग आकर हमने दोनों को अधूरा छोड़ दिया। So I think that Faiz couldn't quite handle the two aspects of his life, his love as well as his work. After the period of time when it got married, there was a prolonged period when he couldn't even produce a lot of decent poetry. I mean, he had written the first of his collections when he was quite young, hit by the throes of first love, first heartbreak, and as a result you see a lot of poems that are shimmering with the themes of love and heartbreak, and how a young lover is pining for the person he loves. And then he went, not after the first, maybe after the second, he went into a hiatus where he couldn't produce as many poems. Maybe he wrote 1 or 2 poems per year, sometimes not even that. And after Faiz had gotten married, there was a lot of tumult in his life, and as a result, a few poems flowed. And so you could see Faiz constantly vacillating between revolution and love. So if you could categorize his poems into themes, you could only think about these 2 things. Yeah. Faiz also holds a great distinction at another of the Buddhist philosophy that's known as Sommukha Jobutsu. Sommukha Jobutsu refers to the idea in Buddhism that all living creatures have this seed of Buddhahood. In other words, if you want to become an enlightened figure, it's not necessary that you've got to be a human being only. Even animals, such as dogs, have the capacity to attain Buddhahood. Or it's even said that grasses can become enlightened. In normal circumstances, whenever we've got to think of a monk, a great master, as it were, we tend to think of a figure who has abandoned the society, gone off far in the woods, living on his own, giving up all of these pleasures or all of the heartbreaks that come along in daily life. But in the field of Buddhism, that's not a great sage or a great monk. It's been said that a great monk comes back to a state of normalcy, comes back to the middle way, avoiding all of the extremes, so that he could encounter beings in daily life who have the capacity to become enlightened. And it's often said that a bodhisattva is a figure who comes back to the ordinary life so that he could help even the grasses become enlightened. So that is the philosophy of Sommukha Jobutsu. Anything or any creature, as long as it's living, has the particle of Buddhahood. Now, there was a Zen master who was once asked, what is the Buddha nature? And perhaps maybe in a bout of rage, maybe trying to be facetious or trying to tell the truth, he said, well, a dog's turd is also Buddha in some ways. Might be quite difficult to digest this, but there are interpretations like these as well. The idea of Sommukha Jobutsu, that even animals have the capacity to become enlightened, is reflected in one of Faiz's other poems that's known as Kutte, dogs. ये गलियों के आवारा बेकार कुत्ते कि बख्शा गया है जिनको जौके गदाई, ज़माने भर की फटकार सरमाया इनका, जहाँ भर की दुत्कार इनकी कमाई. ना आराम सबको ना राहत सवेरे, गलाजत में घर नलियों में बसेरे। जब जब बिगड़े तो एक दूसरे से लड़ा दो, ज़रा सी रोटी का एक टुकड़ा दिखा दो। ये दुनिया भर की ठोकरें खाने वाले, ये फाखों से उकता के मर जाने वाले, ये मजलूम मगलूक गर सर उठाएं तो दुनिया अपनी सारी सरकशी भूल जाए। ये चाहे तो दुनिया अपनी बना ले, ये अपनी आँखाओं की हड्डियाँ तक चबा ले। कोई इनको एहसास ज़िल्लत दिला दे, कोई इनकी सोई हुई दुम हिला दे। So that's the reflection that Faiz has, in that animals like these also have the capacity to some ways dominate the world, if only they could be conscious of it. And in Buddhism it's been said that a great bodhisattva might help creatures like dogs or others to attain enlightenment, attain nirvana, attain a world where you can get out of the realms of dukkha that you get in the samsara. A few elements of Faiz's poetry also touch lightly upon some of the other themes that are presented in Zen Buddhism or Buddhism really. One of the ideas that's central to Buddhism is to be focused on this moment. I mean, this is not exclusively Buddhism, not exclusive to Buddhism, but there are other great philosophies in meditation or religion which stress upon the idea that one should be present in this moment. Spontaneity, or things like these. I do remember a great Zen master's story when a student came up to him. The student was quite visibly in a lot of stress, a lot of trouble. He comes up to the master and says, "Look, master, I am so sad with things. The world is not treating me all that well. My days are not going as per planned, and as a result, I'm in a lot of stress. What shall I do?" The master simply says, "It's a temporary feeling. It's going to pass." Not a lot of help for the student who is looking for very good answers. So what he decides is he decides to encounter other students under the master, wants to ask them why the master is so great. After all, you never see the master under a lot of stress, has a lot of equanimity, equilibrium in some ways in his life. And all of the other disciples of the master tell this visibly disturbed student that perhaps it's down to meditation. The master is always meditating, always involved in the art of balancing his mind. So the student thinks, let me try this. Let me go and meditate as well. Meditates for about a week or 2 weeks, and suddenly all of the distress in the world leaves him. And he is in a state of a bliss of a kind. So he goes up to the master and says, "Master, I'm feeling so good today. I feel really, really good." And the master says, "It's a temporary feeling. It's going to pass." Giving in essence the central idea of Buddhism that everything is impermanent, and attachment to a particular concept of bliss or happiness is sometimes the cause of suffering. Faiz in his poetry explains this concept of impermanence in a lot of ways when he says, "Dil na umeed to nahi, naakaam hi to hai. Lambi hai gam ki shaam, magar shaam hi to hai." In essence, giving you this idea that the most heartbreaking of evenings are going to run down with time. He also has other poems where he simply says, "Kyun is din ko yaad karo jab dil tukde tukde ho jayega." So why do you want to remember that day when you're going to be really unhappy, when you've got the moment here? अगर रोना है तो रोएंगे, अगर हंसना है तो हंसेंगे. तुम अपने कर गुजरो, जो होना है देखा जाएगा. Very simple philosophy, but can be translated into poetry in that way as well. So maybe this is one of the reasons why even Buddhists might come up to Faiz and say, "Faiz hamara hai." Faiz is ours, not simply belongs to the Hinduistic or the Muslim community. Faiz was one of the great smokers of all time, like many writers often tend to be. had an inkling towards smoking, and in one of his anecdotes you get a sense of how much or how fond the man was of smoking. It was a classroom like this where Faiz was taking his examination, and the words were simply not flowing. He had to write a lot down, and he suddenly raises his hand, says to the teacher, "Hello teacher, can I talk to you?" The teacher goes up to the invigilator, goes up to him and says, "Yeah, Faiz, you've got something to say?" Faiz says, "Is it allowed? Can I smoke? Is it allowed to smoke in a room like this?" Suddenly he's taken back. The invigilator doesn't know what to say. I mean, people might ask about pens or copies, whether they want to go to the bathroom to get freshened up, but not really whether you could smoke in a classroom. The invigilator goes, makes a few inquiries, and comes back to Faiz and says, "Yeah, you can. Maybe after a while, a new principal is going to take charge of this college, but for now, you can smoke." And magically, a cigarette appears in Faiz's hands. He starts smoking, and all of the words come out. Such are the stories that are associated with writers. His lungs crashed at the end of his life. His life was one of heavy smoking, quite a bit of drinking. He was very polite, never became boisterous or never raised his voice after drinking, never exercised, and his philosophy was quite simple. He simply said, well, exercise is not for us, it is for laborers. So you might as well do away with the whole exercise business altogether. That was the position of Faiz. This is, just to put a few of his poems into context, take a look at this figure. This is the one of the Indian Empire. If you could call it an empire, it is the India when the Britishers had control of over this great continent of a country. And this is the figure of India after it had been segregated in 2 or 3 countries. The East Pakistan over here was not quite changed into Bangladesh. It was still a part of Pakistan itself, but it gives you a sense that when Britishers wanted to divide India, they made sure that the 2 lands, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which had a Muslim majority, was separated by a great stretch of land across India. And Faiz was someone who believed in the cause of Pakistan. He wanted land for the Muslims. And the word Pakistan also, we've touched upon this in other lectures of ours, that the word Pakistan has 2 meanings. First, in the Urdu language, Pakistan refers to a land of the pure, giving you a sense of how highly Pakistanis think of themselves, or how the users of the word Pakistan might think of themselves as being of a pure heart, pure soul in some ways. There's only one other country which has this idea of purity attached to it, and that is the country of Burkina Faso, which the CIA has written as the land of honest, incorruptible men. So in that way, Burkina Faso and Pakistan's names have a degree of commonality in it. Pakistan's name was also chosen for one other reason, because the word P, A, K, and I, that are the initial letters of the word Pakistan, refer to 4 distinct regions that are lodged in Pakistan. And in some ways, Pakistan always seems to be quarreling about these issues. One is that of Punjab. P refers to Punjab, A refers to Afghan, which is over here, K refers to this region, Kashmir, and I refers to the Indus or the Sindh region of the country. So these are the 4 regions which are lodged inside Pakistan, and as a result, the word Stan was added to the end of P-A-K-I, and that's how you get the name Pakistan in a lot of it. Faiz was visibly angry with this idea of not revolution, but the idea that nothing very good came out of the separation of East and West. Sorry, the separation of India and Pakistan. Now, one of the reasons he was very angry is because a lot of people had shed great amount of blood. If you watch the movie Gadar, which was enacted by Sunny Deol, you get a sense of how many people were killed. There were trains where you could see hundreds and thousands of dead bodies, and people from one religion would often go on killing the ones of the other religion, just to establish this this religiously mandated country in a lot of ways. Faiz was very angry about this, very disappointed with it. So he wrote this, another of his extraordinary poems, which is known as Subah-e-Azadi, which in some ways can be translated as the dawn of freedom. Ye daag daag ujala, ye shab gazida sheher. वो इंतज़ार था जिसका, ये वो शहर तो नहीं, ये वो शहर तो नहीं जिसकी आरज़ू लेकर चले थे यार कि मिल जाएगी कहीं ना कहीं. फलक के दश्त में तारों की आखिरी मंजिल. He quite visibly recognized that this was not really the country that he was looking for. I mean, Faiz worked as the editor of Pakistan Times, its sister company. Imrose worked quite valiantly there, fought for the causes of freedom of speech, but he didn't really think that the country was this paradise, was this utopia that a lot of people think about. Whenever revolutions take place anywhere, people have this idea, people have this crazy construct that as soon as the revolution's won over, as soon as you've got over the line of revolution, all things are going to be automatically good. But that's not really how things turn out to be, most of the cases. And Faiz's indignity was represented in this poem. But when this poem came out, a lot of people criticized Faiz for being very obscure with his message. Are you saying that you have a longing for India? Is this what you're saying? Could you not express your love for Pakistan too much, too explicitly? These were some of the criticisms that were labeled to Faiz. But Faiz, as was his nature, he never replied to anyone with a lot of harshness. He just kept quiet. Faiz was raised by a lot of women, so decorum was his go-to facility. I told you earlier as well that whenever he drank, he never raised a word. He just laughed a bit too much when he drank, but he didn't really raise his voice. Never wanted to criticize his critics in return. I still remember when Faiz was walking around, I think this was must have been in Peshawar. He was being followed by a government spy. And it was a very timed day. At the end of it, Faiz invited the spy to come to his room so that he could have a drink. And he said, look, we're all tired. You're doing your job. I'm doing mine. Now let's sit down and relax. That's how courteous the man was. So he didn't reply, despite the fact that a lot of people had criticized him throughout his lifetime. He didn't really reply to people with a lot of, with acerbic wit. He just replied to them very kindly. Faiz dedicates his poems to people in his country in a lot of ways. There's a glorious poem that he has that's known as Intisab. Intisab in Urdu translates as dedication. And he wrote this poem in order to show solidarity with people that are working class in a lot of ways, people who fought for the revolution, people who are often known as the unrecognized heroes. Faiz was a follower of socialism. In the 20th century, the hope was that socialism would be the way forward. If only workers that were working in a particular factory or working in a particular enterprise could have a say in the means of production, and then we could blur out the distinction between employers and employees, and as a result, all of them would be happy. This was the great socialist ideal that was practiced in Russia back then. If you can talk about Germany, the Nazis are national socialists in a lot of ways. So one could talk about whether socialism went good or not. But the idea that all of them should be recognized, all of the workers should have a say in the means and the modes of production was a very noble one, though its practical implications weren't in those countries all that great. So he, in the poem Intisar, wants to dedicate his poems to the unrecognized heroes, and he does it in the following manner when he says, आज के नाम और आज के गम के नाम, आज का गम की है जिंदगी की भरी गुलसितां से खफा, जर्द पत्तों का बन जो मेरा देश है, दर्द की अंजुमन जो मेरा देश, क्लर्कों की असफुरदा जानों के नाम, खिरम खुर्दा दिलों और ज़बानों के नाम, पोस्टमैनों के नाम, तांगे वालों के नाम, रेल बानों के नाम, कारखानों के भूखे जियालों के नाम, बादशाह जहाँ वाली मासिवा, नायबुल अल्लाह फिल अर्ज़ दहका के नाम, जिसकी ढोरों को जालिम हका ले गए, जिसकी बेटी को डाकू उठा ले गए, हाथ भर खेत से एक अंगुष्ठ पटवार ने काट ली है और दूसरे मालिये के बहाने से सरकार ने काट ली है, और जिनके पग जोर वालों के पांव तले धज्जियां हो गई, उन दुखी माओं के नाम, रात में जिनके बच्चे बिलकते हैं और नींद की मार खाए हुए बाजुओं में संभलते नहीं, दुख बताते नहीं, मिन्नतों जारियों से बहलते नहीं, उन हसीनाओं के नाम जिनके आँखों के गुल चिलमनों और दरीचों की सेजों पर बेकार खिल खिल के मुरझा गई है, बेहाताओं के नाम जिनके बदन बेमोहब्बत रियाकार सेजों में सज सज के उकता गई हैं, बेबाओं के नाम, कटदियों गलियों मोहल्लों के नाम जिनकी नापाक खाशाक से चांद आ के करता है अक्सर वज़्ब, और सायों में करती है आह उबका, आंचलों की हिना, चूड़ियों की खनक, काकिलों की महक, आरजुमंद सीने में अपने ही पसीने की जलने की बू, उन पढ़ने वालों के नाम, वो जो अहसाब तबलो अलम के दरों पर किताब और कलम का तकाजा लिए हाथ फैलाए, वहाँ अपने नन्हे चरागों की लौ की लगन लेके पहुँचे थे, जहाँ बच रहे थे घटा टूप बेअंत रातों के साए, उन असीरों के नाम जिनके सीने के फरदा शब्ताब गौहर जेल खानों की शोरीदार रातों की सरसर में जल जल कर अंजुमनुमा हो गई, आने वाले दिनों के सफ़ीरों के नाम, वो जो खुशबुए गुल की तरह अपने ही पैगाम में खुद फिदा हो गए. Gives you a sense of how difficult the lives of people in Pakistan must have been. I mean, Faiz, when he grew up, saw a lot of poverty. His father was a really rich figure. His father had attended Cambridge, studied law, practiced it in a lot of ways, and Faiz had what we sometimes lazily phrase as a silver spoon around his mouth. But when he went first to a school, he saw that none of the people had good clothes to wear. Most of them were torn. Their bodies were larded with a lot of dirt. And that was the first time he experienced poverty. And he showed a lot of solidarity with poor people throughout his life. And his solidarity with these people shines across in his poems too much. And poems like that. One of the other figures that made Faiz very popular was Iqbal Banu. She's often known as the Queen of Ghazal. She recited a lot of poems of Faiz, and even throughout birthdays of Faiz, Iqbal Banu would come out, she would sing a lot of his poems, and the two always had a very good relationship. The mutual respect for each other was always there. I think that Banu helped Faiz excel, and Faiz did the same to Banu. Two of them were two of the to them were people who helped each other become the stars that they were. I mean, whenever we think of poetry, not a lot of people know a lot of poetry. But if you could translate poetry as a song, if you could read the lyrics of those words as musical pieces, then you get a sense of how beautiful poetry can be. It was General Zia who had put on a decree that women wouldn't be able to wear saris. And Iqbal Banu thought, come on, this is nonsense. Who the hell is General Zia to teach us what to wear and what not to wear? So in a musical performance, she sings Hum Dekhen. And in order to defy General Zia, she wears a black-colored sari. Now, black is sometimes, most of the times, a color of protest. So she sings Hum Dekhenge. हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, वो दिन के जिसका वादा है हम देखेंगे, और जो लौहे अज़ल पे लिखा है हम देखेंगे। जब जुल्म सितम के कोहे गरा रुई की तरह उड़ जाएंगे, हम महकूमों के पांव तले जब धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी, और अहले हकम के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कड़कड़ कड़केगी, हम देखेंगे। So in some ways she's trying to defy all of the fundamentalists that are there. If you watched Coke Studio, for example, you could watch a rendition of this poem that's been sung by many people. There's a great row at Jawaharlal Nehru University in India where they sung this as a form of protest. There were a lot of videos that circulated in not simply the Indian media, but maybe in Pakistani or Western media as well, where police were ill-treating some of the Muslim students that were there. So they were the ones who protested by singing Hum Dekhenge. And it was also labeled as anti-Hindu in India at a particular point in time. And Javed Akhtar was asked about, look, they're saying that Faiz's great poem, Hum Dekhenge, is anti-Hindu. What are your thoughts on this? And he simply said, come on, that's as nonsensical a proposition that I can think of. Because if you go to the later phases of this poem, he expresses a few ideas that are sometimes thought to be esoteric in a lot of ways. So around the latter half of the poem, he says, "Jab ahle hakam ke sar upar jab bijli kad kad kadkegi, हम अहले सफ़ा मरदूद हरम मसनद पे बिठाए जाएंगे, सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे और तख्त गिराए जाएंगे, और नाम रहेगा बस अल्लाह का, जो गायब भी है और हाजिर भी, जो मंजर भी है और नाजिर भी, और उठेगा अनल हक का नारा, जो मैं भी हूँ और तुम भी हो." So Anal Haq is this concept which has parallels to Somukha Jubutsu that we talked about earlier, where everything is a representation of the divine, or everything has the quantum of the divine. If you've had the Hindu philosophy, Aham Brahmasmi, where they say that I am the Godhead, Brahma, in a lot of ways. So Anal Haq is verbatim translation of this word, and this was an idea that was maybe started by the Sufis. I'm not particularly sure about this, but the Sufi mystics had this idea that all of the people, all of the universe is on its own. So when Faiz had expressed this idea, and which was later thought by the people in India as anti-Hindu, Javed Akhtar, the great poet, came around and said, no, Faiz was transcendent. If you read Faiz, everyone can claim Faiz is theirs, as was the case with the poem Intisab, as is the case with Hum Dekhenge. And in the end of the poem, he says, "Aur uthega anal haq ka nara, jo main bhi hu aur tum bhi ho." I am truth, I am God. And not simply I, but even you are truth in your own ways, your Godheads in your own. Aur raaz karegi khalke khuda, jo main bhi hu aur tum bhi ho. The descendants of gods will be the ones who rule the earth. And these descendants are not simply and not simply the people in robes, but ordinary people, or every people everywhere. So that was the universal message that Faiz could convey in his poetry. And when Iqbal Bano performed this great masterpiece, and you could listen to it over YouTube, you see a lot of people who were present during this performance shout and be very charmed by it, very attracted by it. You could sort of hear the howls and the ululations as well. But what GS government did was put a crackdown on this. He didn't really want this to be circulated around. Iqbal Bano was later banned from performing in very many centers of Pakistan. But she had managed in her own ways to help a cassette of the recording out in the Middle East, where there is a sizable Muslim community. So the people, the ordinary people who share a lot of love, brotherhood, sisterhood amongst one another circulated, and it became a great masterpiece. And there's another great phrase in the poem that I just recited, Hum Dekhenge, where he says, the tablet of eternity, Hum Dekhenge, lazim hai ki hum bhi dekhenge, wo din ke jiska wada hai, jo Law-e-Azal pe likha hai. Law-e-Azal refers to the tablet of eternity, infinity in some ways. Now, the idea of infinity is encoded in one of the many Hindu texts as well. That time is infinite in nature. Nature is infinite in its infinity. This idea comes back from a great story, a parallel which you could draw from Indra as well. Indra, who had first defeated the Asuras, was very humble about his win. He was praised by a lot of gods, but he was nonetheless very humble about it. But when many gods came up to Indra and said, look, you're so good, Indra starts to lose his humility, in some ways starts to think, maybe I am really good. So when hundreds of gods come up to Indra and say, wow, you're such a wonderful god, this constant saying of the same thing over and over gets to the head of Indra. And Indra starts thinking, yeah, maybe I am this wonderful, great god. And for a great god like me, I need to build a great palace. So he orders one of his servants, I think the name is Vishwakarma, to come around and build a great palace. Vishwakarma does so and says to Indra, look, I've built the palace for you. I've built the most magnificent palace there is. Indra then said, well, this is good, but I want something better. Vishwakarma thinks, okay, this is a good challenge. I'll pull this palace down. I'll try to construct a new one. So he deconstructs the palace and starts from the scratch and builds the most magnificent palace that there is. And after doing that, he goes up to Indra and says, I've completed the palace, come around and see. Indra goes, checks, says, this is a very good palace, but can you do something better? Vishwakarma thinks, let's do this. This is the god Indra. Anyways, so he goes around, builds another of the great palaces, and again comes Indra, again watches, inspects, and says to Vishwakarma, do it again. Vishwakarma, the poor fellow, doesn't know what to do, does it again, and this series continues for a lot of time. And at the end of it all, there is an irate Vishwakarma who doesn't know what to do. He is doing the same thing essentially over and over and over again. So he says to the creator god in Hinduist philosophy, Brahma, complains about Indra and says, look, I've been building the same palace of Indra over and over and over again. He always says he wants better. He always says he wants something grand. He always says he wants something more sumptuous, more opulent, and I can't go on ad infinitum doing this. So Brahma says, okay, go, you just go. I'll make sure that Indra learns his lesson. So fair enough. Vishwakarma goes, and there is Indra, and Indra says, when are you starting the new palace, Vishwakarma says, look, Vishwakarma thinks to himself, I've already complained to Brahma, I'm not getting any good response. And at the same time, there's a boy who comes up, and Indra says to the boy who's come up, did you see my palace? And Indra says, yes, I did. And Indra says, look, there are so many palaces I wanted to build throughout my time. And the boy says, yeah, I saw all of that, but none of the Indras of the world gone by had dared to build a palace as sumptuous as you're thinking. And when this phrase that there were so many Indras of the past who couldn't surpass what you did comes to the ears of Indra, he is visibly sunk. His heart starts beating faster, and he wants to know what does this boy mean when he says there were so many Indras in the past. So the boy says, yeah, there were many Indras in the past. There were many, many Indras in the past, and none of them had tried to build a palace as opulent that you're trying. I mean, you're the most over-ambitious of all of the Indras that have ever been. And Indra says, how many Indras were there in the past? He really wants to know now. And there is a slight hole from where a lot of ants are coming out. And as if anybody like you has taken a look at a swarm of ants, you see that it feels that they're uncountable in a lot of ways. So the boy points to the army of the ants that are marching by and says, look, how many ants can you see? Oh, hundreds and thousands. Yeah, maybe the number of Indras in the past was greater than that. Comes back to this Hinduistic philosophy that even the gods are not infinite. Even the gods are finite in nature. Brahma opens his eyes, the universe comes about, and all of the things are created. Brahma closes his eyes, the universe goes by, and after Brahma's death, even Brahma is to go and be created and be in this pool of infinity where gods, universes, world, comes about, destroy themselves around, and then after a period of annihilation, come back again from the ashes, and this goes on for infinity. So when Faiz writes Law-e-Azal, the Tablet of Eternity, I wouldn't be able to promise you that he was thinking about Indra and all of these gods, but he also had this idea that the world is infinite in a lot of ways, eternal in some ways, and therefore, Javed Akhtar said, look, if you've got to say that Faiz was anti-Hindu, you've got to be very stupid in order to make such pronouncements. Another we're very quickly coming to the end of the lecture, so I want to talk about this picture of Leningrad. Leningrad was a place in Soviet Russia, one of the more important places. And as you can see, during the World War, the Finnish army wanted to attack it from the north. There were the German army coming from there. And Leningrad was completely seized by Germans. Hitler believed that he could kill all of the people in Leningrad just by cutting off the food supplies there. And whoever would remain would act as slaves to Nazi Germany. That was Hitler's great idea. And this is the hotel where he thought, I'll celebrate once I catch Leningrad. So this is the hotel that's located in Leningrad. And when Rupesh and I were talking to Ganesh Shah, the former environment minister of our country, who had studied in Soviet Russia, he'd been into this place and said that this was where the party would take place. And if you take a tour of the hotel, the people there will tell you that this was a hotel that would have been the fortress of Adolf Hitler had he conquered Leningrad. It just so happened that that period when Hitler wanted to capture Leningrad was full of heavy snowfall, as you can see from this picture. All of it is covered with snow. There's a terrible famine as a result. The food production went down. The transportation was very, very difficult. And if you could see these lines, you would get a sense that these are the only lines from where food was to be transported in the city. If this had been blocked, we don't have any idea what would have happened in the Second World War or the years that follow. It was the trains from this from these lines that food could be transported to Leningrad. And now this has been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it holds such importance in history. And see these. This is a cemetery that's located in Leningrad. Thousands of people died, millions of people died in Russia during the terrible famine, during the World War. And Faiz, I told you earlier, was a believer in socialism. He believed the idea that if he could practice socialism correctly, things would be very, very good. So when he went to Leningrad, he saw all of these pictures. All of these pictures are, he saw this picture of a cemetery. Not simply the picture, he went to the cemetery itself, saw a lot of people who were dead, hundreds and thousands of them. And he was very sad about it and wanted to dedicate one of his poems to Lenin and Lenin city. And this is known as Leningrad Ka Gorista, and this refers to the cemetery of Leningrad. Sard सीलों पर, जर्द सीलों पर, ताज़ा गरम लहू की सूरत और गुलदस्तों के छींटे हैं। कत्बे से बेनाम है लेकिन हर एक फूल पे नाम लिखा है। गाफिर सोने वाले का, याद में रोने वाले का। अपने फ़र्ज से फारिग होकर, अपने लहू की तान के चादर, सारे बेटे ख्वाब में हैं और अपने गम का हार पिरोकर अम्मा अकेली जाग रही हैं. Dedicated to the mothers, not simply the mothers, but people from Soviet. And Faiz was a great figure in the Soviet community as well. Many of his poems had been translated. He had been regarded as the poet of the proles of the working class people. And he also got a Lenin Prize in 1962. Lenin Prize was the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize that you have around here. When he went to Russia, all of his illusions sometimes melted away. This was partly because of the fact that they treated him as a great poet, but whenever it came to matters of political discussion, nobody from Russia wanted to talk to him about it. So he saw that this idea, this hope that he had, that socialism would finally work around and make its way through the world, was being stifled in Russia. The government was becoming much too much strong, and people like Stalin had brainwashed millions into believing that they were demigods in a lot of ways. Faiz, whenever he went for a reading for his poetry reading in Soviet, almost exclusively sold out all of the tickets. People lined up to him, and at the end of his lifetime, he realized, around the end of the lifetime, he realized that there were many people who loved him. And he said, look, if only I had a scale of imagination, that there were so many people who loved me and wanted to listen to my poetry and were moved by my poetry in a lot of ways, maybe I would have put in more effort to write more poetry. Shows the humility of the man. This is the Rosenbergs, two of the people who were killed in the United States of America for espionage. It was believed that these were the two figures who gave the secrets of the atomic bomb to USSR. And as a result, they became the first couple to be put into a death row and eventually be executed in the United States of America. I think that she is the only figure in the history of the United States of America to have been capitally punished for when she had not murdered anybody. Okay. Every other female who's been murdered, not murdered, but put into the death row in the United States of America, always had the charge of murder, and she was the only one who was not. And Faiz is a beautiful dedication to them as well. where once after a person had translated Faiz's poetry dedicated to them, read it, he came out in tears, couldn't believe the heartbreak that Faiz was able to transmute into his poems. So, as you can see, Faiz's poems are universal in a lot of ways. They don't discriminate whether a person was from India, whether one was from the Hinduistic tradition or the Muslim tradition or the Russian tradition for that matter. I wanted to show this picture because this is Lenin's mausoleum. You could take a look at, this is the great figure of Vladimir Lenin, the man who started out the Russian Revolution, led Russia after the revolution took place. His slogan was very simple. And the slogan, which you've heard even in a lot of Hindi movies, Roti, Kapda aur Makan. Okay? Khana, Nana or Chana, as you put it in the Nepalese language, was started by this man. And after he was dead, they thought, we've got to preserve Lenin's body. And his body is still there, protected. I don't think that you could resuscitate Lenin in the future, but his body is there just so that people could take a look at it. Now, Putin was once advised to maybe put it away from public display because at the time of the revolution, many people had died. Many people had died for the illusion that was socialism in Russia or the USSR. Putin said, no, we're not going to do that because it might hurt a lot of people. Millions of people would have to confront that their relatives died for nothing at all, and this is something that we don't want to do. As a result, Lenin's body is still visible in Russia. The man who followed Lenin in leading the USSR back then, Joseph Stalin, also had a mausoleum, but they eventually desecrated the mausoleum. There is a small there's a small place where you could see not see his remains, but there is a goristan of some sorts where his body is, and you can visit it, but it doesn't have the glam that of Lenin, because in Soviet Russia there was a time of de-Stalinization where the stupid, crazy beliefs that were perpetrated by Stalin had to be put out of the minds of the people, and this was started by Khrushchev. So we simply have a mausoleum of Lenin, and I don't know if Lenin was a great socialist, but I think that Faiz definitely was. I'll give you a very small story about Faiz. Faiz, towards the latter stages of his life, was being recognized as the great figure, a great poet, somebody who had a great penchant for art and literature and all of that. So a school was opened up, and he was offered the position of a principal. And it was decided that rupees 4,000 would be given to him as a principal. And he said, look, I won't be able to take 4,000. Give me 1,000 rupees only. And the people were in shock. What the hell is this man saying? He doesn't even want 4,000 when we're offering him. He said 1,000 would be enough. Later, the person who was funding the school came up to Faiz and said, we've got to make it at least 1,500 because even the teachers here get paid 1,500. A principal shouldn't be paid less than that, so I'll raise it to 1,500, and to which Faiz reluctantly said, okay. Shows you that the man was not simply preaching socialism, but lived socialism, maybe unlike Lenin, maybe unlike Stalin, and other figures that he wanted to emulate in his life. This was the figure of what is known in Soviet Russia as the new Soviet woman. This was the sort of thing that was being perpetrated in the USSR back then. A new Soviet woman was to handle all of the things that were presented to her as challenges or as parcels of love in a household, and in the same way, all of the things that they could, all of the work that they could take as professionals in a workplace. So the idea of new Soviet man or a new Soviet woman was there in Russia, and they called this Homo Sovieticus, that the human species would evolve differently if the human species only lived the great socialist dream in the USSR. Later, USSR crashed. Maybe Faiz didn't live to see the ramifications of that. Would maybe most probably be hurt by the developments in Russia under Putin. I'm not really sure about it, but since he was such a beloved figure who wanted freedom of expression, fought really hard for it, wanted people to prosper in a lot of ways, and it would have been very difficult for him maybe in the 90s to have seen the crumbling of Russia. He already had inklings that Russia would, the Soviet dream of Russia would be falling and they'd be morphing into a capitalist country. This was Faiz's wife, Alice. She was a person from Britain. Both of them had one thing in common. They were both communists. It was during the times of the World War, the intermittent period between the First World War and the Second World War, that Alice had come to India, and she didn't really like the fact that it was her native country that was ruling over India, and she fought in her own ways to throw it away, throw the rule of the Britishers away so that India could be independent. And it was then that she'd met Faiz. Alice was already engaged when she'd come to India, but she was charmed, magnetized, arrested by the wonderful figure that was Faiz. And they had a rather tumultuous, I wouldn't say tumultuous, but it must have been very difficult for Alice when Faiz was arrested for the Rawalpindi case. He didn't come back. And Alice didn't know this, that Faiz wouldn't come back for 4 years. I told you a bit earlier that Faiz had undergone a period of hiatus in his life. The marriage was very difficult. He dedicated a volume of poetry to Alice. Alice is not simply written as A-L-I-C-E as it normally is, but A-L-Y-S, like much in the same way that people sometimes tend to write down R-A-W-F for rough copy, just to make it very different. In one of her letters, Alice says that when her parents came to Pakistan, after she'd been married to Faiz, they were sitting in the bed that was there in the bedroom, and the father wanted to go to the bathroom. As a result, he took 2 or 3 steps, and then the fan that was in the room just came and hit the bed in the bedroom really hard. Her father was taken aback by it. Might not have liked the fact that her daughter was living in this place where not simply that the fan fell from the roof, but in the bathroom you could see a lot of spiders and other insects crawl about and come about. Must have been a very difficult thing for Alice as well, which is why she says, look, I in one of the letters she confesses that she wanted to break the tide when she was young. But on a later reflection, she wouldn't want something like that, the hardships that she had in her marriage, for anyone else or any of her daughters or any one of her cousins. It gives you a sense of how difficult the marriage must have been to marry a revolutionary figure like Faiz. Was arrested. It was only after when he was arrested for the Rawalpindi case that a lot of poems, especially the revolutionary ones, came up to him. And he had a lot of time to analyze things of the outside world, sometimes through the people. He would take a look at trees throughout the day to see how it changed its shades, gave him an inspiration in a lot of ways. Faiz the Great, and I'd like to end with this one poem, which is titled "Mujhse Pehli Si Mohabbat Meri Mehboob Na Mang." So he's asking his lover that don't ask the type of love that I used to give in the past. मुझसे पहले सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब ना मांग, मैंने समझा था कि तू है तो दरख्शां है हयात, तेरा गम है तो गम दहर का झगड़ा क्या है, तेरी आंखों के सिवा इस दुनिया में रखा ही क्या है, तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगूं हो जाए. Taqdeer refers to destiny, and Nigum means to come to a conclusion. So in a lot of ways, Faiz's love with Alice inspired his poetry, gave it a shape, a form, that maybe someone wouldn't have got if a person from Pakistan like Faiz would have ordinarily married it just added a bit of glam to his life. She was also capable of supporting their kids when Faiz was put in prison by reading out Shakespeare in Pakistan's radio programs. So such was the tumultuous life of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, a brilliant one. But he said that despite all of the brilliance, despite all of the charm, his life was nothing compared to that of his father, who had a much more glorious life than he did. And this is where we shall end with Faiz and his poems.